So in the last video, I talked a little bit about why you need to keep your book cover simple and make sure you focus on attracting readers rather than trying to communicate too much information. So the easy way to do this are with 3 foolproof layouts for every genre. This is kind of a simple visual guide to how you want to create the art for the book cover. And you'll see this used in tons and tons of other best-selling books. The first one is just a one central image. You have basically a landscape maybe with a house. I like to have a humanizing element, so you could have, a shoe or a bicycle or something that refers to a character rather than just a landscape. You can have the same thing basically with a small protagonist, so that's usually the woman from the back running away. If it's a thriller, they're running. It's a man in a trench coat running. If it's a young adult fantasy, it's a girl probably with her hair blowing in the wind with a dress. But basically you have one central figure. People will ask, well, why can't I do 5 characters? My book has 5 main characters. I don't want to choose one character. You can do it, and if you are really good at Photoshop, you could pull it together and make it look decent, but it still probably won't sell as well as just one character. Someone pointed out recently in one of my Facebook groups, they said, here's a movie poster that has 5 characters and is well designed, but that's a movie poster. It's going to be like 4 or 5 feet on the wall. It's going to be really big, so you can see the details. With a book cover, you're only seeing probably a little thumbnail. I don't think that everything needs to be clear. I don't think the text needs to be clear from the thumbnail view, but if it has 5 characters in it, it's just going to look confusing and overwhelming and complicated, and it's harder to pull it off and make it look professional, which is why generally it's a risk that's just not worth taking. It's easier to just go with one protagonist. If it's a romance, you might want to have 2. You'd have the man and the woman, or the man or whatever. That's generally a place where it's good to have more than one character if it's a romance and the romance is more important than the plot. If it's a plot with a hero who's going through a hero's journey, focusing on one character is fine. And then people also ask about illustration. I think I'll talk more about illustration later. Generally, I don't recommend illustration just because it's so hard to get done well and usually costs a lot of money to get professional illustration. And in most genres, illustration won't sell as well as photo manipulation anyway. However, of course, I've seen best-selling authors spend a lot of money on some fantastic art that's really amazing, and that can work well too if you have a huge budget, if you find a great artist. I just think generally it's risky. So it's easier for me to tell authors not to do it because it generally won't turn out very well. You see a lot of really poorly done illustration, or you just see illustration that does everything the author wanted, but it's trying to communicate too much, it's too busy, doesn't really attract the readers. So then the third layout is just a scene or setting with a larger face. I'll show you some examples of what I mean by these. Oops, it seems like this is a repeat, so let me skip. So for example, when I presented this recently in a conference, my intention was that this was the one that's just the background. But as they pointed out, all of these actually have, this looks like a human up here. This is a guy in a boat, some guy on a fence. So all of these would have been less successful if they didn't have a humanizing element at all. So there is a person in there because stories are about people. These 3 also use very simple serif fonts and one color scheme. This one kind of has 2 color schemes if you consider this is kind of blue and teal and the text is yellow. Like I said before, yellow and teal contrast really well, but this one is just, this one's just one color. There's another cover I like that's all blue like this, but then there's a little boy in shorts and he has red shorts. So having like one flash of color can be a good way to draw the eye, but generally you want like one main color for the whole cover, 1 or 2. These are the other examples. This is just the one main character with a background, usually a pretty simple background. When you do this well, it's easy if you don't know Photoshop to do this poorly. Like if you crop the character out from the background, it'd be easy to screw up her hair, so you'd need an artist to fix her hair. And if you Photoshop someone into a background like this, it's really nice to add this glow light. You see this a lot in urban fantasy too. You have this glowing, colorful light in front of her, but then it's not just a silhouette. I think just cut out silhouettes that look flat look pretty bad, but if done really well and you get a little bit of 3D, you get some of the shadows and the highlights, and then you bring this light and this color around on the edges to make her look like she's part of the scene. That works really well. And then often for supernatural stuff, you can add a little bit of, I think they're called nebula, but like it's a graphic that you can download or find on stock photo sites. I'll talk more later about where to actually get this art, but to do really cool stuff like this, you're basically using layers. Like this one, you could almost just cut her out and put her on a background without too much blending, and it might look okay. But this one was done with a lot of layers. So you have lots of layers in the background, and then light layers, and then the girl, and then more light layers on top to give her this really 3D effect. So if you're not using Photoshop, it's really hard to do this in any other online platforms. Like in my Word templates, I talk about how you can strip out a background, or you can use Fiverr.com and have someone strip out the character and add her to a background. That's pretty easy. But if you want to do complicated blending with lights and layers and make it look really awesome, and even up here, like this title is half obscured by the rising fog, stuff like that, you can't blend layers and do transparency in most online cover design software. You can do it on the online software that I developed on DIYbookcovers.com, which is kind of a work in process. It's using Flash, which isn't great, but it was the only thing I could do to make an online software that has some of the same features as Photoshop that lets you blend layers like that. And then the other one I talked about with the 3 examples is just having one close-up face. Generally, I think one close-up face like this doesn't sell as well as something like this that's both the scene and the character. But there are, of course, examples of books that are selling really well with a close-up face like this. So here's some more examples. If you want it to be, this is basically just the characters and the background, but if you want it to be like an epic fantasy, the bigger the scale of the fantasy of the epic, the smaller the person. So if you want to have like a very tiny character with this huge, massive adventure, that's when you show the background is really big and the character is really small. In these, they chose to put the character on the top half and the scene or the landscape on the bottom half, and they cut off just at the chin, which works pretty well. But even these, you can see these basically have 2 colors for the most part. This is blue and orange, this is blue and orange, this is like teal and yellow, which is kind of interesting. And then they tested little things like this circle down here has a flash of color, like this one is red, that actually stands out quite a bit. I'm not exactly sure why they made those choices, but maybe just for variation between the series. So I'm going to stop this video here, and we're going to talk about book cover cliches in the next video.